Tonight, Israel warns the next stage of the war against Hezbollah will begin soon. It follows days of speculation about a possible Israeli ground invasion into Lebanon. Joe Biden has called for a ceasefire to start now. So how dangerous a moment is this? I'll be joined live by the Shadow Foreign Secretary Andrew Mitchell. Also tonight, here in Birmingham at the Conservative Party conference, we'll have the latest on the leadership battle. Is this a party looking inward before it tries to move onward? I'll be joined live by the James Cleverly backer Grant Shapps, who's also the man behind a new Conservative group to try and help the party get back into power. And this, of course, is the first time the Conservatives have held a party conference in opposition for 15 years. So why did many of them here seem so, well, chipper? I've been asking why. All that and more with Guto Hari and Mercy Muroki, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Monday. I'm Sophy Ridge, live from the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, we're here at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, but things in the Middle East right now are escalating, and that's where we're going to start tonight, because things really are at a critical point. Israel's defence minister has hinted at a ground operation inside Lebanon. Hezbollah says its forces are ready if that happens. Well, as the situation continues to escalate, countries around the world are scrambling to get their citizens out of Lebanon. The UK government says it's doing all it can to get seats on commercial flights so that British nationals can get out now. Our special correspondent Alex Crawford reports now from southern Lebanon.
Searching. These were once two residential blocks packed full of families, many of them displaced. There have already been some remarkable tales of survival. The rescuers took 4 hours to bring out this man from under the rubble. Many of those trapped were found when their shouts were heard. This young man, his face bloodied, live-streamed his cries for help. "My brother and I are trapped," he's saying. "I don't know where my mother and father are." He and his brother somehow survived. His parents didn't, along with more than 40 others, in the single most deadly Israeli attack so far. That sound is the first apartment block coming down after residents say they heard 3 Israeli airstrikes. You're about to see the adjacent second block collapse. Both were filled with families who'd already fled the bombings further south. The Israeli forces say their attacks are dismantling Hezbollah's infrastructure. It's viewed very differently by Lebanese people on the receiving end. This is a literal massacre, this civil defense rescuer tells us. He spent all night pulling people out, including the young man in the video. "I've never seen anything like it," he goes on. "This is a war crime." For the first time this year, the Israeli forces hit central Beirut rather than its southern suburbs. Another escalation. 3 leaders of a Palestinian faction in Lebanon were killed. The Israeli attacks are widening in scope. The strike in the capital is on top of repeated attacks down south and in the east of the country. Among those killed, the IDF said, was Lebanon's Hamas leader, who worked for the UN refugee agency, UNRWA. The Israeli forces are massing on Lebanon's southern border, all pointing to an imminent ground invasion, an impression fueled by the Israeli defense minister while seeing the troops.
This is your mission. We will employ all that is needed. Your forces, other forces, from the air, from the sea, and also from the land.
According to US media, Israeli special forces are already inside Lebanon, possibly ahead of a full-on invasion. But in the first Hezbollah speech since the killing of their leader, the militant group signaled they're ready for any ground battle.
We're prepared if the Israelis decide to enter by land. The resistance forces are ready for a ground engagement.
The number of dead from Israeli attacks in less than a fortnight looks set to eclipse the 34 days of war in 2006.
Whatever the intended targets of these airstrikes, they are coming at enormous human cost. And to the Lebanese people across the country, the Israeli tactics and their consequences are making them feel this is rapidly turning into another Gaza.
19-year-old Zainab has a broken leg, hip and shoulder. She doesn't know yet that most of her family are dead. Her body's broken, but her spirit is strong.
The Israelis targeting that building only means they want to scare us. They target civilians. But you should know we're not afraid. They can't scare us. And even if they try to kill us and maim us, we'll keep fighting.
And Western countries, unable to broker an end to this, are drawing mounting criticism.
All what we want is to stop supplying Israeli arms and Israeli defense forces. And as you see, this is the result. This is the result of the supplies.
Multiple entire families are being killed, 7 members in this one family alone. There's an overwhelming grief in Lebanon right now, as well as a growing humanitarian crisis and the fear that this is going to get even worse. Alex Crawford, Sky News, in Sidon, in southern Lebanon.
Well, the US President Joe Biden was asked about the situation on the Israel-Lebanon border.
Israel may be now launching a limited operation into Lebanon. Are you aware of that? Are you comfortable with their plans?
I'm more aware than you might know, and I'm comfortable with them stopping. We should have a ceasefire now.
Well, the Shadow Foreign Secretary Andrew Mitchell is here with me. We'll hear from him in a moment. But first, I just want to go to our International Affairs Editor, Dominic Waghorn, who joins us now from Washington. Dominic, how concerned is the international community by what is happening?
Well, there's, I think, a mounting sense of alarm across Western capitals, not least here in Washington. I think you could tell from the tone of the US president there, Joe Biden, sounding pretty testy and frustrated. What the Americans are doing publicly is they are signalling to Iran that they need to stay out of this, and that to do that, they are sending a lot of military forces to the region, and they're saying to the Iranians, don't get involved. If you do, the response will be even harsher than what it was back in April when Iran directly attacked Israel for the first time in the wake of Israel's attack on its consulate building in Damascus. And they're saying to the Iranians and Americans that the response to that will be even harsher. What they're also calling for is a ceasefire, and they're doing what they can diplomatically to try and ease tensions and urging restraint on all parties in this conflict. The problem with that, of course, Sophie, is that the Israelis have shown total disregard for American diplomacy. At the beginning of last week, privately sounding that they were open to the idea of a ceasefire, and then within 12 hours or so going right back on their word, and then engaging in the biggest escalation, arguably, that we've seen throughout this entire war. So diplomats in the region I was talking to last week in New York at the UN were saying, what is the point in pushing for diplomacy if the Israelis are just not open to the idea? I think also the Americans will be saying to the Israelis what they've been saying during the war in Gaza, which is, do you have a plan for how this ends? And do you have a plan for the day after? What is, if you do send tanks and troops into Lebanon, how will this end? And will it be any different to your many adventures or misadventures in Lebanon where your forces have become bogged down? But crucially, do you see a way out of this? Because the Israelis say they want to push Hezbollah back to the Litani River and end up with a situation where their citizens can return to the north. How do you get to that point in a military sense? I think the Americans will be saying directly to the Israelis and demanding answers.
Dominic, thank you very much indeed. Dominic Waghorn there for us in Washington. We're joined now by the Shadow Foreign Secretary Andrew Mitchell. Thanks very much for being with us.
Good evening.
This evening. How worried are you by the situation? It feels like we're on the edge almost.
Well, we all want to see the situation de-escalated as fast as possible, but Israel has been the subject of rocket attacks by Hezbollah since the day after October the 7th. Thousands of people have had to leave their homes and move south within Israel. This has got to stop, and the answer is to push back Hezbollah to behind the Litani River, as your correspondent said, or else to say that the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, which said that they should go behind the Litani River, should be fully implemented. And Israel has the right of self-defense. These rockets have been fired over the border, meaning that their people have been killed and had to move south. That must stop.
At the same time, and I recognise what you say, Hezbollah is obviously linked to Iran, heavily linked to Iran. At some point, is there a worry that if Israel keeps striking against Hezbollah, potentially even moving forces into Lebanon as well, that at some point Iran snaps and gets involved?
Well, Hezbollah is a terrorist organisation. It's prescribed by the British government. It is there in force in Lebanon like a cancer. It needs to pull out. And we've seen both ISIL and Al-Qaeda, when the head of it was removed, moved to a very different position. Hezbollah has now lost its leadership. They need to stop what they've been doing in shelling Israel and move back behind the Litani River. And I was very encouraged yesterday to see that the Lebanese government denied Iran permission to land a plane from Iran carrying goodness knows what in Beirut. Hezbollah is doing nothing good for anyone, and they need to lay down their arms and withdraw behind the Litani River.
What do you think the British government should be doing right now, if anything, that it can do?
Well, the British government is rightly trying to de-escalate the situation, but also recognises that Israel has the right of self-defence. But above all, when this ghastly situation stops, and the fighting will stop at one point, we have to be able to build on the Abraham Accords and lift people's eyes to the possibility of a comprehensive regional solution. And who would not welcome what the Lebanese foreign minister has said today about moving towards that situation?
The other part of this picture is trying to get British nationals out of Lebanon. You can tell that that's something that the British government is very focused on trying to make happen. How important is that, and how concerned are you that people may not be getting on the commercial flights now?
Well, it's very important, and I know, because this is an area which is bipartisan in Britain, that the Foreign Office is doing everything it can to make sure that the necessary arrangements are made. We have military personnel on the sovereign base area in Cyprus, in RAF Akrotiri. The plans to make sure we are able to pull out our people who have not been able to get commercial flights are in place, but it's very important that, as of now, there are still commercial flights, that those British citizens leave Lebanon. And I echo the message that the Foreign Secretary has given.
More widely, the Israel-Hamas conflict, the Israel-Hezbollah conflict, has become a real point of talk around at this conference that we're at now, with the leadership candidates as well commenting on it too. I just wanted to get your kind of perspective on that as Shadow Foreign Secretary. For example, Kemi Badenoch was on the Trevor Phillips show on Sunday, where she said that she would be congratulating Netanyahu right now. Israel showing it has a moral clarity dealing with its enemies. Do you agree with her?
Well, I think it's very hard to argue that the world is not a better place with the head of Hezbollah removed from that position. And as I say, the critical thing is for Hezbollah to withdraw, preferably to lay down their arms, withdraw behind the Litani River and stop shelling Israel. If that stops, then that will be a big move towards a ceasefire and peace.
Not just talking about Hezbollah, as you say, a prescribed terrorist organisation, but more widely, we've seen the heartache in Gaza, so many civilians dying. What is your assessment of the Netanyahu administration?
Well, the position is clear. It was under the last government, it is under this government, that we are doing everything we can diplomatically to get aid into Gaza to help the people there who are in a desperate position.
That's not quite the question that I asked, though, is it? I'm asking you to comment on
You're asking me,
policy.
that's what we're trying to do, and to get the hostages back. And you know, who is the Prime Minister of Israel is a matter for the Israelis. Israel is a democratic country, the only one in the region there, and it's a matter for them. And we have a strong relationship with Israel. They are our ally, and we express what we think. And both Rishi Sunak and David Cameron knew Netanyahu well, and they told Netanyahu what they thought about what Israel was doing.
What do you think about what Israel's doing?
Well, I think Israel has the right of self-defense, but they have to do it and exercise it within international humanitarian law. But I'm in no doubt at all when it comes to what is happening with Hezbollah and Lebanon, because of what Hezbollah has done in shelling Israel, sending rockets over the border, causing people to flee for their lives. I have no doubt at all that Israel is acting proportionately in respect of its right to self-defense.
You're very clear on Hezbollah. You say that Israel has a right to self-defense, it has to act within international law. They both seem kind of factual statements, but what is your assessment? What do you think of how Israel is acting in Gaza?
Well, again, they have the right to self-defense, but they have to do it within international humanitarian law. And you will have noted in the memorandum that was published by the government The government said they were unable to conclude that they were acting outside international humanitarian law in respect of the kinetic activity that was going on in Gaza. There were some reservations and some doubts about the treatment of detainees, but in judging international humanitarian law, you have to look to the future rather than the past. And in respect to the detainees, Britain made very strong representations to the Netanyahu government, which were heard.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Andrew Mitchell, Shadow Foreign Secretary. Well, I have to say it feels a little bit strange to be going from the escalating situation in the Middle East and the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah to Conservative Party conference. I mean, conference always feels a little bit of a bubble, and never more so than right here and now, with concerns, of course, about a potential ground invasion of Lebanon, calls for the British Parliament to be potentially recalled. And yet here in Birmingham, a party that's a very long way from government is consumed with introspection as they hunt for their next leader. But of course, the leader of the opposition does matter, and not just for Conservative Party members, because they can pull the government of the day towards or away from policies that matter to all of us, including, of course, the UK position on the Middle East. Here's our first report from our political editor, Beth Rigby.
Tory party conference, but not as you've come to know it. This year out of power and in need of a new leader. This man, the front runner with MPs, knows powdered, no notes, match fit.
Churchill, friends, would turn in his grave if he saw what had happened to this document today.
Touching on Brexit-style battles about taking direction from European courts, Robert Jenrick clear Britain must leave the European Convention on Human Rights to take back control of immigration.
It's leave or die for our party. Let's leave the ECHR and let's get this done. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
You just said in there, if the party doesn't leave the European Convention of Human Rights, it will die. Is that not a little bit excessive? You're saying it's existential for the Conservative Party.
Look, I think a party of the centre-right has to have an answer to these issues. And if we don't take a stand on fixing illegal migration, restoring sovereignty to our people and our parliament, there isn't a future for the Conservative Party on these issues.
What about the country, though? I mean,
well, this is about this. No, I'm not. Beth, nothing. No, I'm not. With
the country aren't sitting there going, we need to leave the ECHR.
With great respect, Beth, I think millions of people across our country would have been very concerned to hear what I just said.
As this conference gets underway, Jenrick building momentum as MP groupings on the party's right come out in support. Kemi Badenoch, his closest rival.
We need to be able to speak confidently about conservatism.
Trying to get back on track after controversy over her remarks on maternity pay yesterday. Some of your opponents say you cut through in the wrong way and it might turn off voters. What's your response to that?
Well, I think that I cut through in a positive way. And the fact that I'm sparking debates shows that I'm leading the debate in this contest. People are talking about what I'm talking about. If you're not saying anything, then you're not going to cut through at all.
But this former cabinet minister concerned about what the candidates aren't talking about.
Well, I'm not hearing enough about the issues that matter to the British people.
You said yesterday that you thought that the banging on about the ECHR made the party look weird.
Yeah, it's weird. That's not where the public are. They're not sitting in the dog and duck worrying about Article 14 of the ECHR.
If you were hoping for this conference to speak to those who aren't Tory card carriers, look away now. This beauty parade is all about the party. The public will have to wait.
Well, Beth is here with us now. Beth, it's the first time that Conservatives have gathered for their conference since being in opposition for 15 years. How do you think it's been going for them?
It is a strange one for me personally as well, because I've never been at a conference like this. The last one was back in, 2005, when David Cameron and David Davis were battling it out to become the next Tory leader. And we've got that again now with 4 candidates. So I think the first thing to say is there's not a clear and coherent message at this conference. If you said, what is this conference about? What are the priorities for the Conservative Party? That's contested at the moment because there's different candidates putting forward different messages. It's a party conference where a party has come in with the worst election result in modern history. they've got to rebuild with the public. The logo is renew and rebuild, but actually until they have decided upon the leader, they can't really, I think, face the public. So we're in a kind of weird world where the headlines are on things that aren't necessarily the public's priorities, like Robert Jenrick is going hell to leather on leaving the ECHR because he knows that that will appeal to party members. Kemi Badenoch is talking about kind of cultural issues that perhaps for the public aren't priorities, but again, it speaks to the party membership, because really what this is a battle to get to the final two. On the 9th and 10th of October, MPs whittle it down from 4 candidates to 2, and then the party members decide on November the 2nd or 3rd who is going to be the leader of the Conservative Party. So I think at the moment, for the wider audience, this conference really is about internal machinations of the Conservative Party. I think the critical thing for the party is whether they end up picking a leader that can communicate with them, but can also throw that out and appeal to the public again. There are some people that feel that this could end up as a rerun of 1997, while they pick someone ideologically pure that the party really like, but they cannot cut through with voters. And that's the big question. Will the person they pick win here, but also begin to win back some of the millions of votes that they lost?
Yeah, and they start whittling down next week, don't they? Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby, our political editor. Right, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? The former Downing Street Director of Communications, Guto Hari, and the former Conservative Government Advisor, Mercy Moroku. Great to have you both with us. Guto, what do you make of conference so far?
I think Beth has put it brilliantly. We're sort of suspended in a sort of different time and a different place where, weirdly, and I don't know what it's like to be dead, but people say, if you are dead, there's nothing worse that can happen to you. And so the mood is bizarrely upbeat here. You know, it's sort of, people are not wandering around feeling depressed. It's actually quite lively. But the question about the direction of the party is a very, very real one. And I just don't understand why it's not patently obvious to every single Conservative on the planet that the person they pick has got to be a person that appeals not to them, not to us, not to here, but to out there. So start by asking the question, is this person that I like remotely capable of charming my mum, my dad, my friends?
Who would you go for then? Who's the candidate you think is?
Well, I have a particular penchant for James Cleverly because I've known him for a long, long time. He was at City Hall, and funny enough, London will be one of the first big challenges. Wales will be the first big challenge for the new leader. But also, I think people hate the Conservative brand at the moment. And if you actually acknowledge that reality, then the best thing you can do is pick somebody who you cannot hate, somebody who's instinctively likeable.
Is there any candidates you say that you could hate then?
Well, you could.
Anyone that you're concerned about?
A face, and you just sort of think, if you don't like Tories, is this the kind of face you want to slap? And without naming names, you know, there are candidates in the race who offer that opportunity to the general public.
Mercy, what's your take on conference?
Well, I think it's been interesting. I have had a chance to kind of go around and hear, you know, the different leadership contenders sort of making their pitch in front of different audiences, and they do all have very distinct pitches. I think that's one thing that's really come across. Of course, Kemi and Robert are pitching really to the right of the party. Tom is sort of pitching to the one nation sort of centre ground. James is kind of pitching to the centre as well, but maybe in a different way than Tom is. I actually agree with Guto in that we really do need to win back the centre, and I think we're at real risk if we focus too much on the fact that, you know, reform, lots of people voted reform. If we make that our point of obsession going forward, you know, over the next few months, few years, then we are not going to end up perhaps in government in the same way we'd like to. We're not going to win back the general population. I'd like to see really the person who leads the party have appeal to ordinary people who aren't ideological. I think we forget when we're in politics that ordinary people are just going about their day-to-day lives. They're not thinking about politics. They're not watching hours and hours of political analysis. I want to see somebody who appeals to the ordinary, regular person on the street.
OK, I'm going to have lots more discussions with you as the programme goes on, but there is a little bit of breaking news that I did want to bring you. This is coming in from NBC, our colleagues. And that is that Israel is planning a limited ground operation into Lebanon that could begin imminently. And that is according to a US official, an administration official, and a source familiar with the planning. So that line coming in to us from NBC. Israel informing the US that the incursion into southern Lebanon could begin as early as today, and that the intent is to push Hezbollah forces further away from the Israeli border and to target their infrastructure, including stockpiles and weapons. That's what the officials explained. Important to say that according to the sources, the offensives will be limited in duration and scope, possibly beginning as early tonight and lasting for days, not weeks. So that line coming into us from NBC, the officials stressing that the operation is intended to be limited in duration and scope. Well, we can talk now to Grant Shapps, former Conservative MP, who of course served as Defence Secretary, among other roles. Just firstly, with your kind of former Defence Secretary hat on, how concerned are you with what we're seeing in the Middle East, in particular the line that we're getting from NBC that Israel is planning a limited incursion into Lebanon?
Well, look, I mean, the Middle East, as ever, right at the top of the world's agenda of concerns, and I think this is, like, absolutely, of course, it's concerning. Having said that, I don't think that any country could have been more patient if they happen to live next door to a terrorist group like Hezbollah, who just spent years firing rockets and ballistics sometimes into Israel's territory. And actually, in some ways, they've been incredibly patient against this Iranian-backed Hezbollah, who, you know, from the north have been attacking them. They've had Hamas break out of Gaza, attack them. They've had the Houthis from the south. They've had the Iranian-aligned militias from Syria and Iraq, and they've had Iran itself fire 400 salvos and missiles and drones into Israel. Israel's actually been, in that context, quite restrained. So, in a way, I'm not surprised that they want to push Hezbollah back. They're regarded as terrorists by Britain. They are supposed to be behind a line which is from UN Resolution 1701. They've never withdrawn to that line. Israel's clearly keen to push them back. But that is not to underestimate the enormous challenges for the region and what this could mean to that region and indeed the world if things did spiral from there.
I mean, people always talk about escalation. It's one of those kind of words that we use a lot in politics that it always feels slightly vague to me what it means, but it's a concern, isn't it? I mean, and you make the Iranian link here. It feels, I guess, very like a tinderbox, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, and the Iranian link is just not a sort of an imagined thing. It's absolutely solid. I mean, I used to read the intelligence on this all the time, and Iran specifically funds, trains, provisions Hezbollah to be able to fire at Iran's enemy, Israel. And so they are a proxy for Tehran. And this has gone on for a very long time. And I think there's still maybe 100,000 or so Israeli citizens displaced from northern Israel because of these rockets that keep coming over. Eventually, Israel's sort of said, look, if you're not going to stop, then we're going to have to do something about it. And that's, I think, is what we've been seeing happening. But I'm not a cheerleader for it. I actually want there to be a ceasefire that has to involve both sides not firing at each other and, stop with those rockets before that can happen.
It's always slightly difficult to make the junction from the situation we're seeing in the Middle East to where we are at conference. The last time, of course, we were at a Conservative Party conference, you were Defence Secretary. Since then, you've lost your seat. Conservatives have lost, I think, 2/3 of your MPs, and you're trying to choose a new leader.
Yeah.
If you get the wrong person, could this be existential for your party?
Yes, I think it could be. I mean, the Conservative Party is actually, the most successful democratic party in the entire world, largely because when we have been faced with very difficult decisions, eventually, if not immediately, eventually we've got them right. And I actually agree entirely with what Mercy and Guito were saying. And actually, maybe for the first time in my life, what Beth Rigby was saying a few moments ago when she was sitting in this seat. It was incredible. Actually, we do have to make the right decision. And the point is, surely, not to make that decision for the person who makes the party feel the happiest or the most comfortable. We have to cut right through that and think about who cuts through to the public, not just the party. In my view, that's James Cleverly. That's why I'm chairing his campaign. And I am old enough to remember 1997 when one William Hague had just been elected as leader, and we came to conference after a disastrous general election where Blair had become leader. And two things. First of all, the Sun newspaper on the first day of the conference did a headline splash on the front page, and it said, you know, the dead parrot sketch from Monty Python. This is a dead party. It's at the end of its road. And Blair was on a 92% public approval rating. Both those things aren't true here. I think we've got a great competition of four worthy candidates. I've got my preference, but I think that all four of them are worthy candidates for this party. And secondly, Keir Starmer, he ain't no Blair, right? And he's on like a negative approval rating after 2.5 months because actually it turns out that she didn't have a plan for change for this country.
Well, he's got a lot of seats, though, hasn't he? A lot
He
more
does,
than you guys.
Wide, broad, but shallow.
You were known in the last race, the last leadership race in the Conservative Party, is spreadsheet Shaps, the guy with the spreadsheet, the guy who'd worked out exactly how the MP vote was going to split. And that matters, of course, because it's MPs who get to narrow the candidates down to the final two before it goes to members. So we know you're backing Cleverly, but with your kind of spreadsheet hat on, who's going to get to the final two?
Well, so strangely, actually, with the smaller party, and you've mentioned it's a third of the size that it was, it's actually much harder to do that work because the approach that I always used to trying to measure those things was really statistical. I didn't know exactly whether this person or this person was going to vote, but on average, I would get it right. Much harder when you've only got 121 MPs. So it's quite unpredictable. So I can...
OK, you've got your excuses then.
OK, all right, OK, my prediction. All right, forget that, scrap that, I can tell you honestly. I wouldn't be surprised if you end up with, say, Robert Jenrick and maybe James Cleverly in the final. I think it's possible that one of those two is Kemi. But you know, it's very, very hard to say because one vote can make all the difference of one person or another person going out and then their clump of votes transferring, as Mercy was describing before, some are a bit more to the left and a bit more to the right, and so there'll be natural transfers. And you just can't...
It's tricky.
You just can't know the answer to that. So there's really a genuinely wide open race. I will tell you one thing. I think what happens at conference on Wednesday will be genuinely really interesting because depending on who comes out top from those speeches could really matter. I was at the 2005 conference, David Cameron and David Davis, and actually there were a couple other candidates in that election, which no one talks about now, but I think Liam Fox, at least one other, who are still in that conference. And it was electrifying when Cameron came out and made his barnstorming speech.
We're waiting for that moment.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Grant Shapps, on the programme today. Well, on the show, of course, we are giving you full coverage of the situation in the Middle East, which is very fast-moving. We've just been hearing from the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. Let's take a moment to listen to what he had to say.
Foreign Secretary, are you anticipating an Israeli ground invasion of Lebanon imminently, and what preparations are we making for it?
I've just got off the phone with Secretary of State Tony Blinken a few moments ago, and of course, we've both seen the reports in the media about a next phase for Israel in Lebanon. We both agreed the position that we had at the UN last week, that the best way forward is an immediate ceasefire and to get back to a political solution, the Amos Hochstein plan that allows Israelis to move back to their homes in northern Israel and Lebanese to move back to their homes in southern Israel, and we both are urging de-escalation at this time.
There are British nationals in Lebanon who have not taken your advice over the last few weeks to leave. Do you have any additional message for them in the coming days?
As you know, I have been urging since coming to office in July for British nationals to leave Lebanon. And indeed, the previous government from October 2023 was urging UK nationals not to travel to Lebanon. But notwithstanding that, of course, we've sent a rapid response team. 700 troops are in Cyprus. We will do all we can to assist people to get out. And we have secured places on commercial flights that are flying tomorrow so that UK nationals can get out. I urge them to leave. because the situation on the ground is fast moving. And of course, whilst we will do everything we can to protect British nationals, and those plans are in place to do so, we cannot anticipate the circumstances and the speed with which we can do that if things escalate in a major way over the coming hours and days.
Foreign Secretary, Iran has made clear that it will attack Israel, it will retaliate if there is a ground invasion into Lebanon. Would the government, in that situation, protect or send any military aid to Israel as the previous government did during the missile attack in April?
I met with the Iranian foreign minister last week and we had a detailed discussion, and of course I was urging Iran to show restraint. I joined with my French and German colleagues as an E3 in urging them to do that, and as you would expect, over the coming hours, we will continue to be in touch with Iran.
We hear your message about the UK's desire for a ceasefire, which you've been making over the last few days. Does the UK agree with the US's response to the killing of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, who said it provided a measure of justice for his thousands of victims? Is that what the UK government thinks?
I don't mourn the death of the head of a prescribed terrorist organisation, but I do mourn the civilians who have lost their lives in the bloodshed over the last few days. And that is why we came together as a G7 of nations and as a Security Council to urge and call for an immediate ceasefire and 21 days in which we can get to a political solution so that Israelis can move back to their homes in northern Israel, so that Lebanese can move back to their homes in southern Lebanon, so that we could see the implementation of Resolution 1701, and so that both these countries can live side by side in peace.
Could this be a critical few hours? Will you be monitoring it very closely?
As you would expect, I have been monitoring the situation in Lebanon since coming to office. That's why I went immediately to Lebanon, and indeed I went there as Shadow Foreign Secretary as well. And it's why I spoke to Prime Minister McCarthy over the weekend, as I have been doing over the last few weeks. We are supporting with the humanitarian effort in Lebanon, and we are urging and pushing for an immediate ceasefire at this time.
Thank you very much.
Well, our political correspondent Tamara Cohen joins us now from Westminster. Tamara, you were just talking, of course, to David Lammy. It feels like there's a lot of concern about British nationals remaining in Lebanon.
That's right, Sophie. I think the clear message from the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, speaking to me on behalf of the broadcasters, was that they are braced for things to move very quickly in the coming hours and days. He said things could escalate in a major way in the coming hours. He's spoken about the concerns that this could lead to a regional war. The first message was to British nationals. They've been told for many months now to get out of Lebanon. He said there have been places on flights secured tomorrow, and he's urging people to take those spaces. The government are not confirming anything about the details of an evacuation operation. We know that they are planning for one, but the message at the moment is that people should get out while they can, because he said things could escalate in an unpredictable way. He spoke to the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken just before doing this interview, and he said that they are speaking with one voice on the need for a ceasefire. But I think it's significant that David Lammy talked about the Israeli declared aim of people in northern Israel on the border, where 60,000 people have had to leave their homes, of them getting back to their homes. Clearly, the UK wants any incursion into Lebanon to be limited to that aim and not to go further. I think that was the subtext to his conversation with Antony Blinken. They're clearly going to be watching this very carefully in the coming hours, particularly with regard to the thousands of British citizens who are believed to be remaining there. But I thought it was also interesting that he talked about his meeting with the Iranian foreign minister in New York at the General Assembly. There's clearly a feeling that there is at least a a dialogue with the Iranian leadership.
Tamara, thank you very much. Tamara Cohen reporting for us there. You're watching The Politics Hub. Plenty more still to come on the programme. Welcome back. Well, it's been 87 days since that disastrous general election result for the Conservatives. But if you thought the first time the whole party got together would be a bit of a wake, well, you'd actually be wrong. Take a look. So I've noticed something a little bit odd about Conservative Conference. Given the fact that they've just had their worst ever election defeat, I thought it was going to be like a wake here. But it's not, actually. People feel quite chipper, which has surprised me. So I've decided to try and find out why that is. How do you think the lead is?
I think it's pretty interesting, actually. It's not something you get every year when you have 4 different candidates. You don't have a leader, but well, with the new government in, it's kind of a nice idea to get ideas from all the different candidates and see what the future of the party could possibly be.
It's looking very positive. I think off the back of the result in July, it's great to come back together as a family, as a Conservative cohort, to meet friends, re-engage and revitalise. And I think that's the energy that we're getting from conference. A lot of people with positive experiences.
Well, there's certainly a lot of post-mortem happening, but I feel like there's also a great deal of openness to ideas. There's a lot of actual discussion about real kind of policies, future policy directions, because we're trying to build that our kind of agenda for the future.
Let's chat to Mercy and Guterres. I just feel like people are quite chipper. Do you think it's like the purity of opposition, like kind of not weighed down by responsibility?
Well, perhaps it's a reaction to the fact Labour are doing so terribly at the moment. Maybe if they hadn't had such terrible headlines over the last week or so, people might be depressed. But on a serious note, I do think actually it does feel that over the past couple of years, we've been talking about everything apart from actual policy ideas for how to go forward, what kind of country do we want. There's been lots of infighting. It felt like every headline was taken up with, you know, this Tory sleaze or, you know, Tory infighting and all that kind of thing. And actually, I have found it particularly refreshing to actually go and see people who want to lead the Conservative Party talking about things they actually want to do going forward. And I think that's actually where the public wants to see things go as well, because I think the general election result was a huge reflection of the fact that they'd almost stopped listening to whatever was going on with the Tory party. They felt that everything the Tory party was focusing on was what was sort of based on the survival of the Tory party rather than the prospects of the country. And so I think there is a mood of renewal and a refreshed kind of party going forward, and perhaps that's what people are excited about.
What do you reckon? Do you reckon it's kind of about renewal, or do you think it's just everyone's in denial?
I think there's a lot of people I've spoken to who I worked with when we were in power who are just saying, now people are starting to realise how hard it is, how difficult it is to run the UK. And they see another bunch of people doing it who are very smug in opposition, and they're finding, you know, that it's really difficult. So that is some sort of personal validation and a break. And some people are high because they're not working so hard anymore, and they're being paid invariably a lot more for having a much nicer life. So there's a little bit of that. But there is a recognition, and this is, as Grant was saying earlier, the most successful election-winning force in the history of democracy anywhere in the world. And so this party, after this week, will get back to, now, how do we get back into power? And there are difficult questions there, and the choice that is being made is a crucial one. We could end up, and I'm old enough and haggard enough to remember, you know, 97, where we went for William Hague, who ended up being a great statesman, but he wasn't ready then. Then we went to IDS, and that was very, very bad. Then we went to Michael Howard, who brought the party back to a level of professionalism. It took 4 leaders before we had a knock at the door of power again. It doesn't have to be that painful, and I only wish that the people here and the people who will vote in due course will realise there is a shortcut. Pick a good person now.
We'll see how that goes. Because I do feel that actually one of the challenges for the Conservative Party is to be listened to, right, to kind of cut through, to have the right to be heard. One of the stories that has cut through this week is Kemi Badenoch's comments on maternity leave in an interview with Times Radio. Mercy, what was your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I take the point that she says she was trying to make, which is that in this country, we over-regulate, there's too much red tape, but there are burdens on businesses. However, I did find it odd that maternity pay was actually brought into that debate as a burden on business. Maternity pay is not that great. Yes, we have, 39-week statutory pay. It's 90% for 6 weeks, and then it goes down to about 185 quid, for the rest of the time. And actually, surveys of businesses have shown that I think 75% pay above the statutory. So clearly they're not feeling like it's a burden on them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be offering women even more money. So I think it was a very badly sort of timed and a very strange way to make that point. But I think I absolutely agree with her fundamental point that we need to make life easier for businesses in this country. But I am a huge advocate for also making the lives of working parents much easier too.
What do you think?
Well, spot on. Easier for businesses, yes. And there has been an assumption, which this party slipped into, and Labour are going to do it on speed, that there are burdens of regulation you can impose that have no cost. They have huge costs, and they will cripple growth. But I think, back to basic, what is this party historically? You could zoom in at any time of the last 100 years. This party traditionally stood for family. It stood for the liberation and the empowerment of people, including women in particular. It's a party that has had 3 female leaders, might well pick a 4th, when the Labour Party yet to pick 1. So you do not single out maternity pay as your example of something that is wrong. Because if you want to boost the family, if you want to actually help women to go into the workforce, if you want to deliver growth, then somehow that is a really rotten target to pick.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub. We'll get more on the mood here at conference as members and MPs weigh who to choose as the party's next leader.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, the NHS workers wronged while working on the front line. Tonight we'll hear from the contractors denied the COVID bonus despite putting their lives at risk. And we'll also hear from the female medics calling on the Health Secretary to get real on sexual assault and harassment. Also, we'll be discussing the future of Strictly Come Dancing after today's report into bullying allegations. And remember the stranded cruise ship in Belfast? Well, she and her passengers are finally preparing to leave port this evening. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors. I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it. Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News at the Old Bailey.
Hello, welcome back. Well, in terms of the party leadership contest, we are, of course, in the middle of this extraordinary beauty pageant. And while there are lots of confident predictions being made about who the final two candidates are going to be, what has been quite interesting, talking to people here in Birmingham today, is that there are so many MPs and other big beasts in the party who've yet to nail their colours to anyone's mast. And it feels like that may be because they just haven't been convinced by any of the contenders.
You're obviously going to be looking at the leadership candidates, the kind of beauty parade. What are your thoughts? Have you decided who to back?
Well, I haven't decided, is the short answer, and I think it's very fluid. They're all actually genuinely very talented people. Each of them has different strengths, and I think there's an opportunity for any one of them to really grab this contest by the scruff of the neck and to do something which gives a breakout moment. I don't think we're there yet, so it's the race is wide open. It's anyone's.
I'm a supporter of Robert Jenrick's. I think we need someone who saw the problems and mistakes of the previous government and resigned from it and made a principled case about why it needed to change. So he's done a lot of the hard work. The other three stayed in the government and they'd have to explain why they did that, because he and I and others were trying to get changes in what the government was doing in its last couple of years, but we didn't succeed in getting nearly enough. Robert did great work on both legal and illegal migration, which is one of the two main things that people are very cross about.
What do they have to do to convince you? What are you looking for?
Well, what we've heard so far, and this is not just at conference but during the leadership campaign so far, we've heard a lot of them say very similar things around issues around competence, trust, unity, infighting, how do we become an electoral force with the public again. A lot of them saying very similar things. What I'm not hearing from any of them at the minute is the how. Of how do you bring unity? How do you speak to the public again? How do you get a fair hearing with the public, who are still really irritated with what we did in the last couple of years of government? How are you going to do that? And at the minute, I've not heard a huge amount from any of the candidates.
Right, let's chat for one final time, shall we, with Guto and Mercy. I think it was quite interesting, particularly listening to Alec Chalk and Ben Houchin, different wings of the party. They were kind of saying, come on, convince me. I don't know who to go for. Do you think that's fair?
Shall I go first?
Yeah,
it's tough. I thought this would have come more alive. I thought some people would have fallen by the wayside by now, and there would have been a polarising of the debate. In one good way, it's been quite civilised, it's been respectful. All four of them are being quite decent, at least in public, about the others. But you're right, we're not clarifying clearly enough what the stakes are. And I think over the next 24 hours, they should all really come out and swing. Because, this is the one chance. And we were reminded earlier how David Cameron managed, in one speech, to turn around the leadership from David Davis and deprive him of it.
I mean, they talk a lot about no blue on blue, no infighting, the Conservatives come together as a family, but you have to kind of, in politics, you need a bit of a rough and tumble, right, to test the ideas, to, because they'll be getting that when they go up against Labour.
Yeah, and I think actually I think James in particular today, I have seen him coming out fighting much more, and he said, I am the only person, who can win an election. I'm the only serious candidate. So, however, I think they're mindful not to look like, again, they're just infighting Tories again. That's probably why they're trying to be perhaps a bit more amicable with each other than previously. But ultimately, I think the next couple of days, we will perhaps see somebody edging out into the lead and becoming the more obvious person. But who that will be, necessarily, and who the final two will be, that I don't think we'll know until we get the results.
It's been a long contest, a very long contest, I have to say. And thanks both very much for being on the programme tonight. Good to Harry there, and Mercy Muraki. Thanks for your time. Well, that is it from us for tonight from Conservative Party Conference, but I'll see you tomorrow at 7. We'll be here again, of course, at this conference here in Birmingham, and of course we'll be keeping you up to date with the news coming out of the Middle East. Up next, it is Sarah J. Mee with UK Tonight, and then, of course, at 9 p.m, The World with Yalda Hakim. But from Birmingham for now, until tomorrow, have a great evening.